Hi, I'm joined today by Mike Crabtree. Mr. Crabtree is now retired from education, but his last position was in Blount County, where he worked as the Assistant Director of Curriculum and K-5 Supervisor for Blount County Schools. He also served as a principal and assistant principal at schools throughout the system, as well as a special focus working with gifted populations in K through 5. So welcome, Mr. Crabtree.
Thank you, Philip. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Well, our conversation is going to be pretty broad. We're going to talk about what people mean when they talk about equity in education. But before we do that, I always open by asking my guests to tell me about a particular teacher who had a really profound impact on them and why that teaching moment was so powerful.
I've had several. A little bit about my background. I was raised in Middle Tennessee in a working class factory town. We weren't wealthy or affluent by any means. But I did have one teacher. I've had several good teachers at different stages, and I guess everyone would say that. If I were to name a favorite teacher, I couldn't. I would have to list probably 4 or 5. One that really stuck out to me, has really been on my mind lately, though, was a 4th grade teacher. She was an elderly lady at the time. She had taught for many, many years, by the name of Bertha Huckabee. And Miss Bertha, she had taught 4th grade, but she was important to me because I had transferred. I'd recently transferred from a large school in town of about 1,000 students. Moved about 5 miles outside of town into a different world altogether, a rural school that had 175 students in grades K through 8. And I was the first transfer in. So I was the first new kid that my classmates had ever seen, and I was a doozy. I was very, very nerdish, had all the attributes that someone would choose to bully, and had a difficult time fitting in. But Miss Bertha, in 4th grade, she had my mother in school, and she took me in. She not only looked out after me, she didn't protect me, but she guided me into the unspoken rules of my new school and how things were different. And the wisdom of that lady, the humor, the character that she had, in addition to her incredible sense of urgency and work ethic, made a huge impression on me. And it set a foundation probably for the rest of my life, where I've had other good teachers, but I knew what to look for in them because of Miss Bertha. She was the first of her kind that I had that took a personal interest, loved all of her kids, and told them so. So that's Miss Bertha. Shout out to Miss Bertha and her memory.
I love that story because I think part of what you're highlighting here is the importance of relationship between teachers and their students, but also the importance of culture in schools and how to help students be successful by learning, as you said, the unspoken rules sometimes of the cultures of different places. And I think that's an interesting segue to this question about what we mean by equity. What does that mean? How does everybody get to participate in those cultures equally? And so let's start by saying, this has been a question in Knox County recently, and even questions about, well, what does equity mean? What do we mean when we use that word? Does the community understand what that word means? And so just really simply, what's your definition of equity in education? What does that mean?
To me, and I'll give you first, Philip, I'll give you my deep impression of what that is, with the caveat that it is different to everyone that you talk to. When you talk about what is equity in education, what does it mean? And there's a lot of different viewpoints on that. It's one of those things that we think that we all agree, or everyone agrees with us, and sometimes they don't. For me, in my particular place, of course, being in Blount County, The biggest sort of there's not a lot of racial or ethnic or religious diversity here. You know, we're in the high 90s white, but there is a diversity among socioeconomic levels, and that's what you find typically. You'll find that. That's the thing that concerns me, is making sure everybody has an equal shot, has an opportunity to be the best that they can be. And I'm not saying the best worker or the best, you know, go to the best college or whatever, but whatever that kid has in mind for their future, we're there to guide them, not to limit them because of their zip code or the neighborhood that they're from or what their parents can or can't provide. We're there to overcome those problems and not to say, well, that's just too bad. To me, that's, you know, if you talk about equity in schools, it would be that every child that walks in as a 5-year-old would have whatever they need to meet whatever resources they need to become their absolute best. And a lot of times we say that, you know, all means all, but when you stop to look at it, really we fall short of that. And it's easy to excuse with a lot of different ways with, well, we did the best we could, or that's just the way things go. That's just the way things are. I'm more about, I'd rather be around people that say, why not? Why are we allowing this? What can we do?
Well, how does this equity play out in the actual classroom itself? I hear what you're saying, that we know that there's a wide range of different experiences that students bring into the classroom, and yet public schools are tasked with teaching every student. They choose every student in that way. And that means we do a lot of work that teachers aren't trained to do in the classroom in order to overcome some of those kinds of inequities. So how does that play out in the classroom? How did that play out in your classrooms?
Well, wait, yeah, there's several topics in there, Philip. I'll start out with this. When you look at kids who come prepared for school as 5-year-olds, kindergartners, what we found is that probably informally, we would guess probably between 70 to 80%, 75% aren't fully ready to jump into the curriculum from day one. Now, after a year, that probably goes down a little bit to where you have probably a third or so, 35 to 40% that are really where they should be, and they're able to move on. A lot of that is the socioeconomic. Like I say, you can attach a race or community to that, but a lot of times it's broken down into who lives in poverty and who doesn't. It's a fact that kids in poverty come to us behind in literacy. There's reasons for that. There's fewer spoken words, fewer books that are in the house. Those type things. So they come to us behind. We do a really good job of maintaining kids where they come to us. Where we've been faulty is that we've never been able to, with all the intervention programs that we've had, we've never been able to really close that gap significantly. Now we can some, but not significantly. and that takes a lot of thinking about, okay, what do we do? Because if a kid comes to us and they're behind, they're one of the 2/3 that are behind, doesn't mean that they won't live a productive life. I don't mean that. It doesn't mean that they won't go on for a vocation or college education in some cases. What that means is that they won't be able to take advantage of the education or opportunities that are out there. So that's where I see it play out. It plays out in the classroom in common ways. It's like if you have one example that's common when back in the day was we would have science fairs. and school-wide science fairs, a countywide, district-wide science fair. And one of the requirements was you had to have a trifold board. And if you know what I'm talking about, it's one of those things, and usually you pick them up at a local, Walmart, and they cost about $7-8. Well, in my family, $7-8 a year was something. Yeah, we manage that for my kids. I always, coming from a thrifty background, I'd always try to save them. My kids always wanted a new one. Well, my kids were raised more affluently than I was, and so usually we had a new one. What we saw was that one thing that we would think as middle class people wouldn't be a burden is a burden to a significant number of our, how to go about communicating using those boards, those type things. So, that's what you see. And you'd say, well, my gosh, surely a parent could come up with $7 for a board at Walmart, said they've got their own cell phone and things like that. Well, there's reasons for those type decisions. But you'd see that play out where a kid wouldn't be prepared for school, for class, would be sleepy during the day most of the time because they had younger siblings. They had to get up because single parent family, mom had to be at work, had to be on the road, had to be up and gone at 4:30 to be at her workplace at 6. And so it's up to the oldest child to take care of the family. The oldest child comes in and they're not prepared for school and not in a very good mood for school. Those are some of the ways that I've seen inequity play out, the advantages that my kids had growing up in a more affluent middle class house than a lot of their classmates.
Well, and I think about this in terms of sort of the unspoken assumptions that we have about what people can and can't afford in terms of supporting their students' education. My oldest has done a few AP classes, and every year when the time rolls around for those, I'm struck by the expense which we are happy to bear for her to have those opportunities. And also this sense that how many more could have some of these opportunities, but for the cost associated with this. And this is not just academics, right? That you think about athletics and what it costs to participate in those areas as well.
Yeah. One of the things, Philip, that I saw that I found interesting is one of the social aspects of kids and their friend groups and how they change over the years. I read a little bit of research on this. I don't have it in front of me, but it's a lot of times in K-5s, you'll have groups that are you'll have classes of kids that are not grouped according to academic ability. But somewhere around 3rd, 4th, or 5th grade, there's a lot of schools that start separating those out when they start getting into the tested subject areas. And you'll have a high class, you'll have a middle class or a couple of medium level classes, and people call them different things. And then you'll have a low class. And one of the things that really bothered me was the amount of kids in the low class were almost, not all, but almost all from a economically disadvantaged background, whether they had special needs classes the same way. So, there's a connection there. That's not a big jump in common sense to kind of figure out the whys of it. It doesn't mean that every kid who is poor has a learning disability. That is not at all what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is in those particular classes of special needs, you will find a lot of kids that come from an economically disadvantaged background. One of the things that does for us is, and on the opposite end, you'll find an overrepresentation of highly affluent or more affluent or middle class background, educated parents of kids in the high classes. And a lot of people would think, well, that's fair. You can't help who you're born to, but there you go. That makes sense. One of the things is how do we deal with that? How do we increase those opportunities? How do we level that playing field a little bit? And the thing that intrigued me was that the social aspect, that when kids were in classes, non-academically grouped, they would make friends outside of their socioeconomic community or group. And they would remain friends up until the time to where the money became a factor. And I saw that in middle school, usually around 7th grade. And that's where kids became teenagers and they became mobile and going to the movies, meeting at the mall, going to the mall, going to the movies, meeting up at high school basketball games, participating in athletics, like you said, those type things, and they cost money. And it's difficult to keep up. And by the time they were in 8th grade, and then when I was my high school experience, even more so when they were in high school, unless they were involved in an extracurricular activity that exposed them to people from different socioeconomic groups, they would stay pretty much in the same socioeconomic group. That's where their friends would be. There's nothing wrong with that, but to me, that cheats our kids out of knowing what's around them. My kids grew up and never had any friends who were economically disadvantaged. They would have very little empathy for those who didn't have the money to buy the science boards. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, and I'm thinking about
never empathize with that.
And
that's the way a lot of us are now. We don't know. We think, well, it's just $7. What's the big deal? And with some people, $7 is enough gas to get to work and back for one day. So, that's a big deal. And if they miss that day because they don't have that $7, they're out of a job. Now, that's real. That is real.
So you said a couple things that, and I'm trying to decide which one I want to pursue, because you sort of talk about this sorting that takes place, particularly in the early elementary levels. Either whether it's intervention because we recognize some students are falling behind in terms of literacy, or whether it's challenging students who are being really successful. And in both of those cases, I can see an equity argument made that this is meeting the students where they are and trying to move them to the next level. I can also see how that kind of sorting reinforces the underlying driver of that inequity. And so, what other models are there? Are there other models for doing that important work without also reinforcing the reason why we're doing the work in the first place? If that question makes sense.
Yes, there are other models. It is very difficult to step out and take a risk on those other models, because the teachers, the administrators, the schools are all primarily judged on standardized test scores. And so what they're trying to do is maximize the academic potential of each child. And when you talk about, okay, we're going to put them in a setting where they can learn in a way with their peers, with their like peers, and the high kids can move on at a faster pace. The lower class, they can move with more support, have more support, and have more help with them. There is an element of equity to that. It's why it's done. It's why it was done when I was principal. I can't say that I, moved the needle on that. The only thing is that, okay, how can we, outside of those classes then, in the social structure of the school, how can we bring groups together that normally wouldn't be together in a large school setting is what I'm talking about. How do you create that culture where you realize that the type of house and car that your parents drive may be different from a classmate down the hall, and that's okay. How do you get kids together like that? My big thing is now, the thing that I've learned, this is hindsight is 2020, I think. The thing that I've learned now is talking about those things, identifying those things, and acting upon them intentionally, being intentional about building relationships, not just for the sake of building relationships, but so that we can make the connections to where we can accomplish our goals of kids being the best that they can be, the best academically, the best character that they can come out with, the best understanding of society. All those things are big mission goals of schools. And those things we just need to be intentional about. I hope I answered your question. There's not really a good answer there, Philip, because you have competing needs. And if it comes down to, okay, the thing that we're going to be the first thing and the biggest thing that they're going to judge us on are test scores, then all your resources, or the majority of your resources, are going to be, and schedule and everything that you have are going to be moved in that direction to meet that need.
Well, talk to me about test scores then, because my fifth grader just finished her TCAPs yesterday. They're having a pizza party today. And I know, one of the questions that as a candidate, I'm being asked all the time now is, what do I think about standardized testing? And once again, I feel like it's a similar dynamic, that we need good data to inform our decisions about where academic gaps exist. And at the same time, we don't want to be in a position where these instruments are driving the entirety of the conversation about what we're trying to accomplish with students. And threading that needle seems to be getting harder and harder every year for educators and for students and for families and everyone involved.
Yeah, I think I don't think when educators complain about the standardized test, there's a lot to complain about. I really don't think that the majority of people in public education, we don't mind at all being assessed or having our students learning assessed. That's important. The big thing is, and this is where the rub comes in, is that it's done fairly and that it's done accurately. That's an accurate representation of what the students have learned. That's the part that really frustrates educators, I think, more than anything, is the system has a lot of inherent flaws. And there's a big lack of understanding about how it works. It's complicated. It is incredibly complicated. How you come up with the value score, like the value added scores for teachers, it's very complicated. And we try to simplify that down, and really we oversimplify a lot of those things. But no, assessment really is key to education, I think. And that goes beyond standardized tests. One of the things when I was a supervisor that we determined that we needed to do was we don't need to teach our tails off and the kids work their selves to death, learning, and not know exactly where they are until they take a standardized test. That's like two teams being chosen for the Super Bowl and not practicing until the game. You don't know where you are. You don't play any games. You practice, but you never play any competitive games, so you don't know. So we, and a lot of systems, our current move is going into what they call formative assessments. And they're kind of like a in between. They're not really a standardized assessment, but they are. They tell you, they give you data that you can sit down with kids. This is what I love. You can sit down with kids, show them, this is where you were, this is where you are now, this is where you need to be, or you can go. How are we going to do that? And that has made, I think, has engaged kids, has the potential to engage kids more. And we know by research that engagement is key to effective learning, that the more that a kid is engaged at any level, the more they are going to learn. And I think once you explain that to them, this is where you are in your learning, this is where you were, and this is where you need to go. That gives them a roadmap. It makes sense to them. And when things make sense, people tend to work a little bit harder, more effectively, I'll say.
So what can, at the policy level, I mean, there's the practice of teaching, there's all the social and emotional support that we know students, especially after the past 2 years, are going to need to be effective learners. But at the policy level, what can school boards do to sort of, as I understand the job of a school board, is it's to sort of set the agenda where we should be headed, where we to adequately understand where we are now on these questions, and to explain where we ought to be, and then to support the professionals in the field and give them what they need to get there. Yeah. So are there one or two things that you can think of that should be at the very top of any school board's agenda if they want to take equity seriously?
Yes. Yeah, I had to give a little thought to that about how to answer that. You know, my answer today is different than it would have been 2 years ago, because you really have to factor in the cultural aspect of it, the movement of parents who've picked, in my opinion, who have picked a couple of culturally divisive issues. It may be real to them, and every parent should be heard. I totally support that. But taking those issues and that have become emotionally inflamed, and calm down the rhetoric, and let's sit down and talk about issues. If you want to talk about issues that affect your child in the long run, there are some that are out there. One of the things I think it's important for a school board member to do is you know, people elect you. You are their voice. You are their eyes and ears for the inside of the school system. One is to listen to those parents about what their concerns are. What are their hopes? Not just what they're worried about. What are their hopes and dreams for their kids, their grandkids? Say, I am invested. You said I was retired. I am retired from working for the school system. But I do have grandkids that are coming up. I do have family members that still work in public schools. Even if I didn't, I'm a community member who's affected by that. And so, you know, what my concerns are, what my hopes and dreams are, those are things that I think need to be communicated with you. What I have in mind. You know, everyone is an expert on public education because they've had 12 or 13 years experience going through it. So everybody knows. And, you know, and there's more to it than that. But it would be listening to those stakeholders, listening to the teachers, listening to the students, asking them how they feel about their schools, their teachers, their principals. Those that what's important to them, all the staff members, and really, you know, schools are more than teachers and principals. You know, you have everybody, teaching assistants, custodians, the incredible job that they do, lunchroom workers who are among my favorites, bus drivers who provide a critical service that, you know, my gosh, if you ever sit down and listen to them, they can fill your ears. But it's all those things bringing together and working together. You know, I was blessed. Miss Bertha and that school, certain time and a certain place, put me in a certain place that it allowed me to see how a school could function as an institution that the community could be proud of. That's the place. That was what brought us together. We were a family. All of us were. And we were together so much, it was just us. And we were a family. And I still have friends dating back to that early experience. when I became a principal and administrator at the building level, that's the thing that I saw that I really wanted for my schools. And so as a school board member, it would be what roles do schools play in communities? They're not just a place where kids learn to take standardized test scores. They are a place where life takes place. That's where kids grow. They live life. The people, the employees there, they share life. The parents, the grandparents who come in and listen to the band recitals, they all share a communal life together. That's what we need to get back to. We, don't let outside forces, for whatever agendas that they have, tear us apart, wondering about what kind of odd theories are taught in this textbook or that textbook. That can be dealt with, but that does not need to divide us. Schools are too important for that. Public schools are too important for that. They are a bigger place than where kids learn to take test scores. How's that for you, Philip?
I think that'll, as they say, that'll preach.
I'm about to get fired up on that. It's not a negative, angry message, but it's just an appreciation after all this time of someone who can see how it can be done right for kids and for communities. When it's done right, there's nothing better. And there's so many things, so many stresses on all of us that really, a school board member, I would love for a school board member to have the attitude that, hey, I hear you. I'm listening. I got your back. This is what it's about. And this is what I'm going to keep an eye on to make sure that we're in that direction, that the people we hire have this attitude, that the policies that we have move towards this mission of educating kids to be the best people that they can be. Keep that mission, keep that vision in mind, get a good one. I don't know what Knox County's is, but if you get a good one, communicate that, talk about it a lot, talk about it all the time to your constituents, live it. And that's that's where you see the great results. That's the thing that you can be proud of. That's the thing that makes you feel good when you go to sleep at night.
Well, thank you so much, Crabtree. I appreciate you talking to me about equity and what public schools can do and what they have done and what I still think they can do, even in the midst of what has been a contentious 2 years. I agree. I've said in a couple other contexts, I think we have to find our way back to each other and resist those forces that are trying to tell us we can just take our views and not worry about other people. And I think you're talking about schools as families in a way is a really powerful way to remind us that we don't get along with everybody in our family, but we want what's best for them. And we want to work together sometimes, even when it's hard, to move everyone forward. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you, Philip.